What's up, everybody? Welcome into the How Not to Be a Youth Pastor podcast, the podcast where everything's made up and the points don't matter. That's right. The points are like telling your students not to go to the bathroom during service. It doesn't matter. They're going to do it anyway.
Just straight up ripping off Who's Line now? I feel like we're going to get sued.
Yeah. Do you like it or not? Like,
I love it. I don't love being sued, but...
Nah. Who
are we joking? They're not going to...
They don't know we exist.
No.
ABC's not... ABC? I don't... What network were they on?
1, 2, 3. I don't know.
Now I feel like we have to look it up for copyright purposes.
So, who's your favorite character from Who's Line anyway?
Oh, man. That's tough. I almost think I would say Colin. Colin Mockery.
Yeah, he was the super tall
like
one,
Colin.
right?
No, that was Ryan Stiles. Colin was like the
right.
older bald guy.
Yeah.
And then Wayne Brady. Those three were on pretty much every episode. I mean, we're not like diving into like the reruns and like the
right.
All the new episodes. Like nobody cares about those. But those three together, and then there was always a rotating person for the fourth. But for the record, it was ABC. So
well done.
I'm pretty proud of myself.
I'm not.
It was ABC originally. CW got in there.
Yep.
All of those other ones. But it's the How Not to Be a Youth Pastor podcast. We're excited to be
here.
We're
glad you're here, whether you're tuning in online via YouTube or Instagram.
Or the audio via. Is there a wrong way to say it?
I don't think so. I really don't.
On Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the iHeartRadio app.
Whichever your
heart desires.
Is. Yeah, I like that. Can I ask you a question?
Please, hit me with a quick question of the day,
I have a quick
Derek.
question of the day, Mr. Besh.
Yep.
What was one of your fondest quarantine moments?
So
by quarantine, I mean the pandemic of COVID-19.
I thought we agreed as a society never to talk about this ever again.
That would be nice.
I was under the assumption that we all had this silent pact that we were never going to acknowledge that was it was a dark place for everyone. We didn't like it. It was not fun, so we're just going to ignore it.
I mean, all those things are accurate.
That's true.
But there has to be some kind of silver lining in there.
One of the funniest things that I remember from. So first of all, it was. I mean, it depends on how long you want to. What exactly time period you want to talk about here, but I think it was June of 2020 that Michaela and I got our cats.
Nice.
And they are hilarious and precious and we love them. But that's not fun to say that that's all my fondest memory was getting our cats, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to say one of my fondest memories from quarantine was the discovery of the TV show Lego Masters.
Great show.
Followed closely by Michaela and I buying a whole bunch of Legos so that we could build stuff.
I remember you getting that, and I was like, you guys are seriously the best. That's such a genius concept.
Like, why not? Like,
yeah.
It's such a great show. So entertaining. I think my favorite... Have you watched a lot of it?
I've watched the whole first season.
I think my favorite challenge I've ever seen them do was when they had like this... They had two platforms, and they had to build a bridge that spanned the expanse between the platforms.
Yep.
And I don't remember how long it was, but they, whichever team had, it was like kind of based on design, like, cool design, cool. If you have a bad design, that sucks. But they also had to design it to withstand, like, whoever had the bridge that could withstand the most amount of weight automatically went through to the next round.
Yeah.
And so they just kept stacking more and more weight onto each one. And so that was really, really cool.
Wasn't it like 1,000 pounds?
I remember at least one of the teams, the production managers had to stop the production from adding more weight because it was becoming a safety issue.
Yeah. Which is Legos.
Yeah. Yeah, it was awesome. It was like 2 feet, 4 feet off the ground. It's not like they were like walking on it 30 feet in the air.
Right.
Nobody was actually walking on it. They were just putting weights on it.
Yeah, but like it was a significant amount of weight.
Yeah, it was. If it wasn't 1,000 pounds, it was awfully close. I don't remember what it was, but
which is just bonkers.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Such a great show.
Great show. What about you? What was one of your fondest quarantine moments?
So my birthday present or Christmas present, I can't remember. But from my wife to me was to make our spare bedroom in our basement of our house a game room, like with the whole new TV, like decorations, repainting it, like everything. And so that was, my present, like to have the funds to do that. And so I actually ended up getting COVID around, I think this was
we all did, let's be honest.
So
Whether some people just didn't test for it, but we probably all got it.
I think this was like November of 2020. So it was like, had been around for 6 months and I had not gotten it. But all of a sudden, like I kind of started to get like cold symptoms, and then all of a sudden my scent and my smell slowly went away, and I was like, well, this might be it. And sure enough, I got it. So I was quarantined at home for a week, and I couldn't do hardly any ministry stuff because all my stuff was at my office, and it didn't do me a ton of good at the time. So I decided I feel okay enough to work. I'm going to renovate my game room and just do it while I'm off. So my wife's at work and picking up kids from daycare and such, and I'm down in my room painting, like repainting the whole room. And so my wife, Meg, gets home hours later, and I got, podcasts ripping in there and music, and she opens the door and goes, whoa. And I was like, what? She goes, can you seriously not smell that? And I said, no. She goes, you don't have a window open, and you're painting. Like, apparently, like, the fumes were, like, pungent from coming down the step. But because I had no smell from COVID, I was just painting high, apparently.
Proud of you.
Yeah, it was. So then I cracked the window, and I felt fine the entire time. But it was just fun to.
I'm sure you felt fine.
I mean, yeah, I did. I felt weightless, you could say. I don't know. I've never been high in my life, so I can't tell you what that feels like. But it was fun to kind of like see that full renovation in a week's time and go, I did that while I was sick. So kind of crazy. And on one hand, I don't know how you feel, Kyle, but on one hand, it feels like that was an eternity ago. And on the other hand, it was like, it was 3 years ago. Like we are coming up on 3 years, almost to the day when, the whole world shut down. Kyle and I are both in Minnesota, and I think it was like mid-March where,
if I remember right, I'm trying to look it up here. It was a Wednesday night that a lot of things kind of hit.
Yeah.
Because like I remember, hearing some things about it and things were happening. Yeah. So Wednesday, March 11th was the day that the NBA pulled a couple teams off the court right before they were going to play their games. And I remember after youth that night seeing that on the news, and it was kind of like, oh no, this is a thing.
Because at the time, everyone's kind of like, it's not a big deal, and like,
right, yeah. And so that was. I remember that moment of kind of like, okay, this is going to be a big deal. And by I think it was Saturday or Sunday night, my wife got an email from her office saying, don't come into the office on Monday. We're going to institute working from home for a couple weeks. And she never, after that, went permanently back into the office, which was a win. But I definitely remember like after that Wednesday night, and me and a bunch of students went to Dairy Queen afterwards, and we were at Dairy Queen and saw it on the news, and I was like, oh, this is a thing.
Yeah, well, and I wanted to kind of just like rehash this because again, I think a lot of us are trying to just like suppress that memory because it wasn't
100%.
A trip. But where we're gonna go with this episode is, I think it's important for us to look as church leaders what the impact of COVID was, because I don't think anyone anticipated it being what it was. How it was in Minnesota, how it was kind of approached was, what, this is a real thing. This is something we have to be conscious of and cognizant of and be prepared. But it's a two-week deal. Like, we're going to flatten the curve was the phrase that kind of...
If I hear that phrase one more time, man, I'm going to lose it.
And the whole premise was like, let's give hospitals a break and that kind of thing. But that 2-week flatten the curve got extended by a week, and then it was a month. And then really it began this year-long season of unknowns. And then you sprinkle into there, like, if you as church leaders, if you host a service, you are liable to having cops show up and arrest you. There's a pastor down in Florida that got arrested during church because he said, we have faith in God. We're not worried about a virus. And so they met anyway, and he got walked out in handcuffs. And there's we could get into the weeds as to the ins and outs of that. But Kyle, what I want to kind of just like tackle this episode is I was reading somewhere recently. I think it was in a book actually. And they made a comment that I thought was very astute and very, very wise. Is they talked about how the national landscape of the church, the Big C church, really can be classified into pre-COVID and post-COVID as like the church prior to 2020, at least in, recent years, is different than the landscape of the church post-COVID. So the churches that you and I are in now, they had a different tone in 2020 than they do in 2023. And there's good reasons for that, and there's not so good reasons for that. And so, I just kind of wanted to chat through today, like let's chat the good and the bad, and kind of what do we do with that? Because, we had personally adults or parents that were super consistent and that were there, 3 or 4 Sundays out of the month. Kids never missed a Wednesday, and COVID happened, and I haven't seen them since. And I don't know if they're going anywhere at all. I don't know if they switched churches. And so there's a bunch to unpack here. But before we jump into the good and the bad, is there anything else that, kind of strikes a chord with you, Kyle, as it pertains to church and COVID? Yeah,
I think that, one of the prefaces I have for this episode is like, there were bad changes. Like you said, like students that, we didn't see after COVID, and there were good changes. And so we want to kind of highlight both of those, comparing pre-COVID and post-COVID church and what does that look like? There were people that stopped coming. There were new families that showed up. There were systems and processes that died with COVID and new ones that started. And some of that was good and some of that was bad. Yep. From a broad scale, worldwide church perspective, not just at our churches.
Yep.
And so, I'm excited to kind of dive in as much as I want to put it out of my memory. And that's the other thing too, for people who were working at churches, youth pastors especially, if you went to school for youth ministry, no, you didn't have a segment of a class called How to Do Church in a Pandemic. Everybody trying to just do all of this on the fly. Yeah. Everybody trying to, I remember our church board at one point approved for us to get some new video cameras so that we could, have a little bit higher quality when live streaming our services through the quarantine period. And, it was like, it wasn't something where we could just order them on Best Buy and get them the next day. Like, there was all camera equipment was on back order because every church was scrambling to figure this out. I remember the first Sunday. So I don't remember if we had church. March 11th was that Wednesday night. I don't remember if we had church that Sunday. Would have been March 15th. But the first Sunday that it was like widely shut down and everybody was online, Facebook crashed.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right? Because like they weren't prepared for all the churches live streaming on Sunday morning, which was hilarious. And so that was just some of the quirks and things that kicked off this whole process, I think are worth acknowledging. And there's grace in all of this because we all had no idea what we were doing.
Yeah, well, and it was so interesting to see, Facebook would have ads on the side. So you'd see, here are 10 things to do to pastor your church through COVID-19. I remember having this conversation with my lead pastor, like,
who wrote that?
Yeah, right, exactly. And like,
speaking from experience,
I appreciate the effort. Like, that's awesome. But like, who can sit there and say, hey, I have pastored my church through a global pandemic?
Right.
Like, was it the Spanish flu? That was like the most recent memory.
Yep.
That was in like 1904.
Yeah, something like that.
So like, I pastored my church when I was 6 months old, and so let me tell you, as
the guy writing it is like, I sat down and had a conversation with my 135-year-old great grandpa who was pastoring during the Spanish flu. Here was his advice.
Go back to like Abraham ages, like that's like
if I can picture that article now, like old great grandpa Lenny's advice on how to pastor through the Spanish flu. Like number one had park your horses in the right spot. Like, make sure you social distance your horses when you park them. Like, because it's not going to be like, make sure you are putting high quality streams on Facebook.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Was the telephone around at that point even? My history is escaping me.
I don't know.
Because we are so off track. But
telephone was invented in 1876.
Okay, so they did have phones.
Things that weren't around in 1908. I think it was 1908, not 04.
I'll tell you one thing. Twitter was not around.
That's for sure.
It was close. Came shortly thereafter, but was not that much longer.
Timeline of United States inventions from 1890 to 1945. While I'm looking at this, can you do me a favor? And we need to be accurate with our information.
Yep.
Can you look up when exactly the Spanish flu was?
Sure.
When that pandemic was? Derek said 1904. I'm shooting for 1908.
If you're in a crunch and you want to get to the real content, just skip ahead by about 2.5 minutes. We'll be back on pace here.
Well, no, because everybody knows that we don't really start our real podcast until 10 minutes in, but we're 16 minutes in. We already got to some of the legitimate content.
We have a little bit of February 1918. So we were both way off.
Okay. I'll scroll down a little bit.
Phone was way in by this point.
Inventions in marshmallow cream was invented 1917. So I'm glad we had that to get through the Spanish flu. The torque wrench was invented in 1918. French dip sandwich was invented in 1918. Okay, so let's keep going here.
You're just lacing Tucker.
We did not yet have the toaster.
Well,
during the Spanish flu.
I assume toaster strudels were out.
We didn't have the polygraph, so we couldn't tell who started it because everybody was lying and we didn't know how to tell. We didn't have adhesive bandages. We didn't have the convertible or water skiing.
What? We didn't have water skiing?
We didn't even have the cheeseburger till 1924. This is the greatest website I've ever been on. This is going to take a little bit of a different turn, but the gas chamber executions were invented in 1924 as well. We could have done without that.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up.
Spanish flu was doing a heck of a job of executing people on its own. We didn't need gas chambers.
This episode
Can I say that?
Off the
That's
rails.
bad.
It has been off the rails.
Masking tape, tilt-a-whirl, garage door opener. Garage door opener was invented in 1926. That seems early.
Excessive, yeah.
I feel like that was more of like a 70s thing.
I'm not buying your reputable website here.
Well, it is Wikipedia.
I'm gonna continue.
So
it is not.
Oh yeah, 100%. Wikipedia page entitled "Timeline of United States Inventions from 1890 to 1945."
Holy buckets! I'm moving on
for sure
because that was like a rabbit trail of all rabbit trails.
Let's talk about some of the good things that came out of COVID. Shall we, Derek?
You mentioned it. All right, you mentioned the first one that came to my mind immediately
was Facebook beefing up their ability to do live streams on Sunday mornings.
In essence, that's part of the segment.
Oh, all right, cool.
I mean, I was gonna say like it increased the online presence and social outreach from churches. Why? Because you had to. If you wanted to have church, you had to go virtual. So it's so funny that you say that because like all camera equipment was like gone. Like all camera switchers gone, cables gone. Like it was just.
I remember, this isn't camera related, but we because you did your game room. That was your COVID renovation. Ours was our basement. And as we were tearing apart some of it, we found there were some tiles with asbestos. And so it was like a week into quarantine and I had to go to Home Depot and get an N95 mask.
Oh,
and I found one, but I felt like an idiot Cause I was like in the checkout line, I think I got 2 of them. And I was like, guys, I promise I need this for like construction purposes. It's not because I'm super paranoid about COVID. Like I promise I really actually need this for its intended purpose. And I didn't feel like anybody believed me.
No.
But you're right. There was a lot of presence boost. And I don't think that quantity was the only increase. I think that the quality of what was on now we're just going to kind of get into maybe good and bad at the same time here. I do think there was a lot of churches like ours that upped the quality of what they were doing online. There was some nicer equipment, just more intentionality, because that was the only thing you could put effort into.
Correct.
Like you couldn't put effort into your in-person services.
Yep.
The only people attending your in-person services were the people behind the cameras.
Yeah.
It's so like there was more intentionality that went into it, which I think was a plus. But I also would say, looking back, I don't know that I would have made the same decisions around streaming worship. Because, and this might just be me. You can give me your opinion. If it's just me, that's fine. I don't think a single time through quarantine I legitimately worshiped to the live stream of our church. Not because not because I hated the people on the stage, or not because I was in a grumpy mood that day. Like literally just because it's really hard to do that well.
Yep.
And Spotify has the exact same effect.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
And so I think that was one that even we are talking since COVID, we have streamed our whole service.
Yep.
Before COVID, we were streaming, but it was just the message.
Yep.
And we have kind of had some preliminary conversations about potentially going back to just streaming the message because of how much work. Now that we are also mixing the band for in-person services, and that is the primary focus of our sound guy. I don't know, it's so hard to do them both.
It is.
And I think that was maybe something that I would have done differently.
Yep. And we actually ended up we have not streamed worship for years for that very reason.
You did during COVID, and then we took
started,
it out. Yeah,
we started. And it got to be where the quality was so poor. Not because of the talent of the musicians, but you need a whole separate mixing board. Because you can't just do them all in one.
Some boards, depending on the board that you have, you can have a separate send for the online stream. But even if you're doing it on the same board, it still presents the problem. Like I've done it for typically, because every church knows that one of the hardest times to ask people to volunteer is Christmas Eve, because they got traditions they want to, and so I usually end up running sound or something on Christmas Eve.
Yep.
I got to be here anyway, so I'm fine with it. But I love running sound, but I hate running sound twice.
Right.
And I have to mix for the live stream and I have to mix for the live audience. And those are 2 completely different mixes. It's incredibly, incredibly difficult. Yeah. I don't do it well. I'm just going to be honest.
Well, and it's hard to. You almost need a separate mixing board with a separate mixing person to do it well.
Yeah, I agree.
And at what point is it worth it? Because again, not that it's not awesome, but if you're looking for a worship experience, you're probably going to go to an Elevation where they have a whole separate rig on purpose for their worship, and separate cameras and separate angles. And so all those different things. But, we're going to get back into the bad that kind of presented, but I think you're super right. We went from an iPhone on a $10 Amazon tripod with a microphone that was more ambient. That was our streaming setup.
Do you want to know what the irony of that is? Your podcast is currently being recorded on a phone with a $10 Amazon tripod.
Microphones are a little more expensive.
That's
but
true.
Beyond that, it's, but that was it for us. But we kind of got to a spot where it's you nailed it. There's nothing else to put effort into. So let's make this look good, and we're paying dividends on it now. We have that same equipment, and we're able to pump out. That there's a reason that I mentioned this either, I think in the last episode, like there is a family that came to our church because they found us online and got a good glimpse of who we are. And so like it was there. So, it just allowed, and with that too, and then I want to move on. It kind of engaged, like, it's crazy to me that social media really is a mission field of itself, because people are on it so much that you might reach people that you'd never see in person, but you can reach them, virtually. And so it kind of just forced us to look at the social media aspect of this whole thing.
I also think it forced us to ask the question of why behind our social media.
Yeah.
And we dove into this in a separate episode, more in depth, but okay, what is the purpose of, our Facebook account as a church? What's the purpose of streaming our services on Sunday mornings? What is the purpose of the other posts that we make throughout the week? And forcing churches to ask that question. Any organization that has a company Facebook page or a company Instagram page, these are important questions to ask. And I think that one of the great things about COVID is that it forced churches to ask those questions.
And not just on social media. You kind of segued that perfectly. Like,
thank you.
You'll be here all week. I get it.
I will be. It's my office, so yes.
You quite literally will be. How much of this candy remains will be.
This is my dinner.
Okay, perfect. So well done. Pizza and candy.
When I have diabetes later, we'll know why.
Fair enough. This question, I think, was asked, at least in our context with everything, is why are we doing this? Like, it's one of those things, COVID, when it just completely upturned everything, it revealed a lot of these systems and a lot of the things that you just did for no other reason other than the fact of we've just always done this. Like passing the plate. Like during COVID, we didn't pass the plate. Why? Because germs, and people were super conscious of being close to each other. So like passing the plate didn't work, which got us asking, why are we passing the plate? Are there pros to this? Are there cons to this? Why are we doing that? Things like greeting at the doors. Like,
Derek, it's so nice to see you this morning. Turn to your neighbor and shake their hand.
Yeah, right? That's another thing. And ironically, we got back to that because for so long it was like everyone just kind of minded their own business and there's power to community. But it asked that question, is being Minnesotans and Scandinavians who want to stick to ourselves, does that put people in a more uncomfortable spot to have to stand up and interact with somebody new? Like,
all of the introverts would say, no, we're good.
Yeah, exactly.
But I agree. There were like some of those just things that we don't even think about. And like to the passing the plate, I think COVID boosted people's recognition, congregants' recognition of giving online. And now, this is going to be skewed because I was going to say I bet giving is higher in the last year or two than it was the 2 years before COVID because, people, they at a lot of churches anyway, because people, when you automate your monthly giving, I think you probably give more than if you don't.
Yep.
Now, granted, we also all had stimulus checks that also probably helped with giving to churches, but I think that the push to online giving and helping to automate some of that, now that doesn't work for everybody. If you're salaried, it works great. We got a guy in our church that owns a concrete company, and like he can't do automated giving because he makes a different amount of money every single month.
Yep.
And so he'll give like 2 or 3 months at a time. But I like, for most people, I like the idea of, like we don't pass the plate anymore because, it was, a sanitary question mark, but it resulted in more people giving online. That's a win.
Yep. Or just feeling you're less likely to feel guilty if you pass the plate and don't put anything in. Whereas if the plate doesn't get passed, then you don't feel ostracized.
I disagree. I give online and I still feel incredibly guilty if I'm in a church. Like our church doesn't pass a plate anymore. But if I ever go to a church where they pass a plate, like I would feel incredibly guilty because
that's what I'm saying.
it looks like you're, like it's almost like you need to like, I give online as you pass the plate.
And that's exactly what I mean is like you feel that guilt. Like and those are things you just don't realize happen until you sit there and go, I guess I could see how that happened. Because like you would never sit there and when you sit down in a staff meeting and go, hey guys, hear me out on something. Let's not pass the plate. Like, they'd be like...
The senior pastor and the church accountant started sweating immediately.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Hold on.
Yep.
Can't do that. Even like our church... So my sister's church down in Nashville, they... the Sunday after Christmas, they always take off. And they stream like an old worship set, or they will record an extra worship set and stream it that morning. And then they'll have somebody pre-record a message and for that Sunday, and they'll like put together a service and just set the automated stream, and their whole staff gets that Sunday off after a busy Christmas season. And our church was kind of talking about that, and I think it was like this last year, it didn't really matter because Christmas was on a Sunday, and so, or it was something weird with that, but we talked about it, and for a small church, you are dependent on 52 offerings in a week or in a year. 52 offerings a week would be great.
That would be awesome.
But you're dependent on 52 offerings a year.
Yeah.
If your congregation moves to primarily giving online and it's automated, you have the ability, especially at a small church, to potentially take that a Sunday like that off.
Yep.
And you're not going to be in a desperate spot financially.
Correct.
And so that I think is a cool win as well.
Yeah. A few more here that I think just kind of helped us is the layout of rooms. We realized that we need to maximize this space because we have to when we got back into the building, but like with restrictions of like people so far apart and everything, you kind of realize
there's smaller capacities to each room.
Yep, and you realize like this space is underutilized or overutilized, and it kind of made you go, okay, like how can we better do this? Even the structure of services, we kind of sat there and go, is worship too short? Is worship too long? Do we want to be put something in here to kind of help fill the void, especially with youth? It kind of got to a spot. It's like if you 90% of youth games are very germ friendly. Like
that's accurate.
So it's one of those things. Like especially on the youth side of things, I sat there and went, how can we? Because for us at the time, that game time was critical to our service, just to kind of set the tone for the night. So it's like if my library of games went from this big to I got 2 ideas, like it kind of went. Okay, so how else can we bring energy, or how else can we bring engagement with students and that
Derek,
kind of thing?
do you like soda?
Yeah.
Here, drink one. Through your friend's sock.
Yep, that's out.
You're telling me that we can't do that anymore? Oh, man.
We still can now. We're back to that.
COVID's not a thing anymore.
No,
we can do it.
It's gone.
But for a period of time, you're right. There was adjustments that, especially with youth services, okay, like even there were churches that had to make adjustments with how they did communion.
Yep.
That was, I remember, a big conversation in a lot of different churches. And so, and even like post-COVID, like I bet we do games 25% of our Wednesday nights. Like a lot of Wednesday nights, most Wednesday nights, we don't even do games. And that was 100% something that was kind of born out of COVID, almost out of necessity, but I wouldn't go back.
Right.
Because our students, it's essentially created a culture where our students are like, we'll throw them in every once in a while, but and they're fun and I love them. But it's kind of setting the culture with our students of like, we play hard and we pray hard.
Yeah, I like that.
I made that up on the spot, but I kind of like it. Okay, next one that was definitely good that came out of COVID. I would say just like a desire and a newfound passion for like faith and connection. I don't like even the introverts at the end of quarantine were like, okay, we've had enough. And the prevalence of, every single news network had like the COVID death toll,
Yep.
Posted at all times, and like different things like that. I think that it brought a greater urgency for faith for some people. A lot of times, and this is something I don't think we've really ever talked about, but one of the biggest demographics of people coming to church is couples with young kids.
Yep.
Because it's kind of like, oh shoot, like I should raise my kid to have some morals, right? Like we got to figure this out. And so things like that, I think that there are stages of life where you start to ask some of those questions, and there's life circumstances where you start to ask some of those. And this was a life circumstance where people started to ask, like, what do I believe?
Yeah.
When you're confronted with your own mortality, I think that those questions get asked a lot. And so there was that newfound or rediscovered maybe desire to explore some of these faith things. And I also think that there was a connection, like human to human, like COVID quarantine sucked and nobody liked it. And so we need, like, I want to be more intentional about spending human to human time with other people.
Yeah. And you had to get creative to do it. We had... I would say our students bonded big time during COVID just because they were desperate for connection of any sort.
Yeah.
And we were able to provide some form of that. But, we did a candy drive where it was coming up on Easter when COVID happened. So we had 5,000, 10,000 pieces of candy that we were going to use to stuff Easter eggs. Well, we're for sure not doing an Easter egg hunt in April of 2020. Like, that's not happening. So Meg and I, we put on Instagram, like, hey, if you want some candy, and it sounds a creeper, but a
little bit,
if
I'm disappointed I didn't see this. I would have come.
You should have. It was super fun. If students wanted to, they sent us their address, and we just drove by. And there's a guy in our church who he owns his own sign shop and vinyl business. So we got a big poster that said, we love our Bridge youth students. And we would just drive around from house to house, drop off literal bags of fun-sized candy on their front step, take a selfie from 10 feet away, put it on Instagram, and then go off to the next house. And we went from house to house to house to house to house. And the kids loved it. It kind of recertified who we are as a youth ministry. You and I, you remember this, you and I tag teamed
we did
youth services a few times where it's you and I got together when it was safe to do so. You live streamed on your socials, I live streamed on my social. We had 6 phones and tablets and everything pointed at your stage, and we played games, and there was creativity there that I think just kind of sparked a really natural fire into our youth ministries of we're doing something new, and it just created a bond amongst our students that I thought really kind of helped propel us into this new season we're in now. Yeah,
I remember those kind of combined live streams we did. I think the 2 biggest things that I remember taking away from those are, one, I have no tolerance for heat, spice in my food, and you suck at drawing pineapples.
Yeah.
Those were the 2 big takeaways, I think.
Can you explain what that was? Because someone's going to be like, what?
Why was Derek drawing a pineapple? Well, so we did, it was related issues. We live streamed us doing a Pictionary battle, us and our wives.
So Kyle and I we both went live from our homes on our social medias for our youth students.
And we had to, you and I together, okay, this is what we're drawing.
Yep.
And whoever's wife guessed it correctly first,
they got a point.
We got a point. And it came down to the last one, and we were drawing a pineapple. And Derek had a really hard time drawing a pineapple.
And so we had established a bet prior to the start of this game that the loser has to do a Blazing Wings challenge from Buffalo Wild Wings.
Yep.
And I lost.
And the winner got to eat the wings of their choice at the same time.
Yeah, which you thoroughly enjoyed. So I think I had 9 or 10. I would have finished them, but we stuck true to the genuine rules of the Blazing Challenge. So I couldn't have any drink.
Yep.
And I had to eat 12 wings in 10 minutes.
10 minutes, was it? I don't remember.
Whatever time it was.
Yeah.
But I had made it 9 or 10 through. I had only a few left. I just ran out of time. Yeah. So we called it. But then the next week you
yeah,
did a
or something
similar.
like that. I was like, screw it, I'll try it, and it didn't go well. Actually, my brother was in town, and so he was on that live stream. I don't. Yeah, it was fun, but he's actually coming into town next week, so it'd be good to see him. Anyways, yeah, I think that the relationship building was definitely something that was a plus. Coming out of COVID, and just that connection piece was something that a lot of people missed, and it was cool to see it come back.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of good stuff, and there was a lot more good stuff that we could talk about that came out of COVID. But there was definitely some changes that we saw, patterns that emerged that went the other way. That were not great. And the first one that we'll mention here would be pastoral dropout. Obviously specific with churches where, there were churches that closed their doors. There were pastors that stepped away from ministry. And a lot of it was just burnout related to, I have no idea what I'm doing. This is a new season, that a new thing that no one prepared me for. And there's no playbook for it, except for that one article that Derek found from the Spanish flu, and we don't have any idea what we're doing. We're all making it up, and I think there were a lot of people, a lot of pastors that really caused a lot of burnout.
Well, I think it revealed, because I've been thinking a lot about that specific thing, and I kind of think that COVID was the dagger. But it really revealed a lot of negative patterns leading up to that, where it's like they were going at a unsustainable pace for a long time, and no one just saw it, or they didn't recognize it, or they didn't have a super solid community or infrastructure around them to keep them emotionally, spiritually, physically healthy, and so when all of that is stripped away and made bare thanks to a COVID pandemic, you have all of those already negative patterns, and now throw on a heap of complete terror. Because, we kind of like flippantly talk about it right now, but I think it's fair to say most of the world thought we were all going to die. Like, this was like, we were waiting for World War Z or whatever these zombie movies are. Like, people were convinced the whole world was going to die.
I think that the Will Smith movie, I Am Legend.
Great movie.
That would be a great reference here.
Yep. I think so people were terrified. And so as such, like, pastors were getting grilled, like, what are we going to do? And what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
And so you throw on, it's kind of like, to put it in this analogy, if you're running a marathon and you're at mile 24 out of 26.2, and you get to mile 24 and you're gassed and you find out you actually got 50 miles left to go.
You were running the wrong way.
Yeah, exactly.
You had, not only do you have to run those 24 again, but then you have the original 26.2 you have to go.
Yeah, and I think it got to a spot where pastor going, Uncle, I can't do it anymore. And it's no fault of them. We don't sit here and criticize them by any means. I think it just got to a spot where we realized, like, COVID was the dagger that, it revealed the nasty side of everything, and we really kind of got to see things for as they were. And, pastoral dropout and church closings were, at an all-time high. And there are still many vacancies, even in our denomination, in our state, that churches don't have pastors because COVID claimed their pastor.
I'm flattered, Derek, but I'm not looking to move. But I think that just the whole theme of that, and when it comes to churches closing their doors, I think not all of that was because, like, the senior pastor stepped down and nobody else stepped in. Yeah, I think that decline in church attendance, just an overall apathy for church, kind of in some settings and in some people really set in. And I think the core of the problem for a lot of that was, a lack, if you had failed to build community within your church before COVID, those people were going elsewhere.
Yep.
There was nothing keeping them at your church now that, there was absolutely no personal contact whatsoever. And it was so easy to just go online and stream any church in the world.
Yep.
And so that was, I think, a driver for churches closing their doors and people leaving churches was just that I didn't have any relationships here.
Right. Yeah, and it's what's kind of even more crazy is some people stayed at their church, but they never went in person. Because it's a lot more fun to go if all you're getting from church is just the sermon. It is nicer to sit in your PJs with waffles and sit there and not have to get the kids loaded up and do all that thing. Like, if you didn't have that communities aspect, you worry just for the sermon, so you might as well do it in the comfort of your home. And I think, what started out as that way, which is not inherently bad, I think we all just got so sick of virtual anything, virtual meetings, virtual.
That is accurate.
Everything. Like, people are just like, if it's virtual, I'm not doing it because I'm going to throw up if I hear Zoom one more time. You know, so I think people just kind of got sick of going online, so they just stopped going altogether, and church attendance dropped. What didn't help the matter either is shocker, but when you have a worldwide pandemic that brings in a lot of emotions, opinions and division were unprecedented. I know this is going to be a little raw to go back to, but we are not super far removed from the mask versus no mask debate. We had people who would come to us as staff and go, how in the world am I going to go to a church that doesn't enforce a mask? And in the same day when we're putting a mask mandate out because we have to legally, we had people saying, how dare you not have faith and stand up to the government for what we believe in? It's the mask versus no mask debate was nasty. And it was just, it got mean spirited sometimes. And I get it. People are passionate. People have opinions. That's great. I love that. But the problem is there was no respect shared between the two. It was like, I am drawing my line in the sand. And if you're not doing this, then, quite frankly, screw you. That's kind of how it felt after a while. And I think that kind of thing is what contributed to pastors were under scrutiny a lot in that time. And that, I think, to me, kind of transgress into a vax versus no vax. Are you getting the COVID-19 vaccine? Yes or no? Are you getting the booster? Yes or no? All these different things. What ended up happening is COVID brought a whole new wave of political division amongst church goers. This was not just a red and blue division. This was a health, division back and forth. And it just kind of made the political hot buttons all the more intense. And there were some legitimate feelings and decisions that were made as a result of these decisions.
Yeah, this is real quick. I have a thought on that, but I wanted to mention, you mentioned Zoom and not wanting to hear that. In January of 2020, Zoom's stock was worth about $75 a share, which is roughly what it is worth today. It peaked at, do you want to take a guess?
550.
559.
Really?
Yeah.
Come on.
Well done. Which is what? Almost 8 times?
Yeah.
Can you imagine how rich we could have been if we had invested in Zoom stock? We wouldn't have cared about all of the divisive conversation. But I think that, I remember this was one of the only times I've ever purposely been controversial on Facebook. Because there were, and I don't know if you remember this or ever remember seeing any of them. There were 2 videos that were going around on social media during, the summer and fall of 2020 where, and I was getting tagged in a lot of posts. And so that's why I felt like I was getting sent these videos and tagged in these videos of people, sharing their thoughts on it. And so I felt compelled to kind of issue a response. One was a pastor down in Georgia preaching on how, COVID. I think it had something to do with end times and just like a whole bunch of stuff with that. And then the other one was a documentary that came out, and I believe it was called Plandemic. And it was all about how like the United States government started COVID, and it was like basically this whole conspiracy theory thing. And both videos got shared by a lot of people in our church, and they were tagging me in it. And so I responded, and I sat down, I watched both videos, took a ton of notes, and I had like 5 pages of notes. I wonder if I still have that somewhere. But it was, I issued a response. I posted on Facebook like, hey, here, I watched both of these. Here are my thoughts. Like, this one said this, claimed to be biblical. It's not. This one said this. I looked up all of the statistics they used, and they're all false. Different things like that. And there were some people in our church were so mad at me. And I remember calling our senior pastor, and I was like, hey, like, should I not have posted this? Should I take this down and whatever? And he was like, honestly, like, if it's truth, then no. Like, it's okay to leave it up. And I wasn't mean in any way. And I think that that's where, like, you know, the two big issues, like mask or no, vax or no. You know, is there a actual true right answer? Maybe. Is there a great way to talk about it? Absolutely. Is there many divisive ways to phrase your opinion?
Most definitely.
Most definitely. And I think that and what we're going to go into next here were very closely linked. Was all of the divisiveness around everything. Because not only was it, you know, COVID related, but then it was political, you know, election season related.
Sure, it was.
That you threw on top of it. And as a youth pastor, the mental health hit that we saw our students take, our church congregation take, that was substantial. And I think still something that's being recovered from.
Forgive me. I mean, I don't want to say the exact stat because I want to be factual, but I did a sermon on this about a year ago. And I'm just going to be vague because I don't want to mislead the witness here. But
wow, good courtroom jargon.
Thank you. I don't want to be false here, but essentially the number of documented cases of clinical anxiety from like 2020 to like 2022 had risen by like 200%. Like anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, all these different things went through the roof. And is it any wonder? Of course not. Like, let's think about what we're dealing with here. We have division at, I would say, a historic level. You throw in an election year and everything we just talked about, everybody is divided on everything. That's no bueno.
Well, and don't forget that we like advertised how many people were dying every day.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, fear is literally fear is being preached.
Yeah.
Like everywhere. I'm not saying preach from the pulpit, but like when you have death counters on every single major news station, like you couldn't get away from it. Sports were covering it because there were no sports. Like schools were conscious of it. Like you were violently aware that COVID's coming and it could come to your house next. So just be prepared for it. Like, of course you're going to be freaked out about that. Like it's not just like because how it was discussed was if you get COVID-19, you're dead. Is basically how it was being addressed.
Yeah.
And people did die. Like, to be clear, I know people closely who they had friends, family members who passed away from COVID-19. It did happen. But my point is fear was like everywhere. So you have division, you have fear, you have probably, I would say, the biggest contributor, isolation. We as human beings were not meant to be isolated for long periods of time. I don't care if you're the most introverted introvert, you still need human connection. There is a super interesting psychological study that was done, I think, in the 1970s, where they went to an orphanage of little babies, and they split them into half. Half the babies would be considered the
Please
control.
don't talk about babies being split in half.
Okay, sorry. It is in the Bible, by the way.
That's fair. Biblical. All right,
yeah.
Continue.
So the control group, though, were babies who were considered normally nurtured. You know, if they started to cry, the orphanage workers would, go and check their diaper and pick them up and rock them to sleep, get them a bottle, do whatever. Normal things. The experiment group was no extra affection or engagement was given to the babies. If they had a dirty diaper, okay, they wiped the diaper, but put them right back into the thing. If they needed a bottle, they just dropped the bottle in and took off. There was no actual human connection to these babies.
Can I ask a question about this study?
Yes.
What parent voluntarily signs their kid up for this?
It's not. It's an orphanage.
Oh, sorry. I missed that part.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my goodness.
Nobody. It's an orphanage. So, but where I was going with it is they had to stop the study because babies were dying. The lack of human connection was actually causing physical ailments that resulted in babies dying.
Wow.
And so the study basically said, it kind of showed that we as human beings, we not just like crave connection, we are actually designed to have connection. And so like this whole year-long hiatus where you're not around any other person, of course your mental health is going to spin up. Like you weren't designed to be in isolation for a year. So where I'm going with all of this is, like just because the quarantine period is over, does not mean that these health issues and these mental health issues just disappear. Like I would say that's the biggest thing that has been a lingering side effect of COVID is like mental health and just overall psyche has radically changed pretty universally.
Even from a youth ministry perspective, though, I don't think it's just the mental health because I saw from an academic and social growth perspective, there were most students that like took noticeable steps back in like their social development and in their academic development pre and post COVID.
Yeah.
And like distance learning was really, really hard on a lot of students, really hard on a lot of families. I saw I don't remember if it's Harvard or some big university is like for the next 5 years or for some amount of time, they are no longer going to require standardized test results on admissions. And they're basically going to study to see if it has an effect on the quality of students that they are admitting.
Sure.
And I heard it and I was like, well, that's bullcrap. Because all of the students that regardless of like, I loved taking standardized tests and I acknowledge that I am on the outside there. Like most people hate them. And there's a lot of people that just are actually not good test takers, regardless of any of that. And I don't care if the study finds like objectively that it makes a difference or not. All of these students that they're doing these studies on had formative educational years where like at least one probably was distance learning.
Yep.
That was a hindrance to kids' educational development. Yep. And so you're probably going to find that the standardized test kids had higher scores in your classes than the non-standardized test kids, but it has nothing to do with the standardized tests. It's because these kids went through COVID.
That's correct.
It's because these kids went through distance learning and had their educational growth stunted a little bit. Yep. And so I think that like as youth pastors, I don't think we are out of the woods yet on we have less of the educational side we deal with, but from a social development side, I think that we are not out of the woods yet as far as regaining the ground that was lost from distance learning and from quarantine in our kids. Yeah. That and the mental health side of things is definitely something that we still need to make sure that we are up on, make sure that we are informed on, and it's something that we need to make sure we're looking for and looking out for in our youth students.
Well done, man. Drop the mic.
That's done.
The
Nailed
good
it.
And the bad of COVID-19.
The last time you ever have to hear us talk about COVID. Maybe. Hopefully.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we have full control over that. So we're the ones that decide which episodes to do.
That's fair.
So, going back to our leadership podcast from the last episode, we are the ones that step out first and make the decisions.
No more COVID-19.
There you go. Done. You heard it here first. So that does it for today's episode. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. The works. iHeartRadio. Wherever you find us, we're glad you did. Until next time, Kyle and Derek, I think it's time that we go hug our kids. Goodbye.